USSR and North Korea, but rarely Salvador Allende's Chile. And the reason for that is simple.
Does socialism always cause disaster? Response to Ethan Klein. Let's see what Overzealots' new video is about.
Made a video where I responded to clips like this.
Any socialist country devolves into disaster.
Socialism is bad because socialism is tyranny.
What have I ever done except get hundreds of millions of people killed?
The whole point of that video was to refute the idea that socialism always leads to disaster and tyranny. I also went on to show how capitalism, due to its very design with its constant need for profits and expansion at the expense of human well-being, has led to dictatorship and catastrophe many, many times. So in this video, I want to do two things that I didn't have time for in the last one. One, talk a little more about past socialist projects that have a bad reputation among certain crowds like the USSR, China, and so on, and add a bit more context as to why some autocratic and undesirable deficiencies emerged in them, and two, go over some of the many socialist projects that didn't turn into what Mr. H3 could call a disaster. Unless, of course, the capitalist powers of the world overthrew them and installed or supported a right-wing dictatorship, but that has little to do with socialism and a lot more to do with protecting capital and Western business interests. So let's do that now. When you hear the term socialism, I doubt you immediately think of the definition, social ownership of the means of production, and what exactly that even means. Your mind probably just instinctively jumps to countries like Cuba, the USSR, China, and so forth. Now, the debate, even amongst leftists, on whether or not some of these countries constitute socialism rages on. We won't entertain that right now, but what we can say for certain is that all of these countries prior to their revolutions were much worse off. In Cuba, the US-backed right-wing dictatorship of Fulgencio Batista prioritized American business interests as his regime was responsible for wicked human rights abuses in the form of mass murders and torture. Tsarist Russia was a semi-feudal backwater filled with misery and destitution, and same goes for China. I'll let Dr. Parenti give you a glimpse into the state of China prior to the rise of the Communist Party.
When the communists liberated Shanghai from the US-sponsored Kuomintang reactionary government in 1949, the communists found that about 20% of the population in Shanghai, 1.2 million people, were drug addicts. And every morning, special crews of street cleaners, quote, would gather up the corpses of children and adults who had been murdered during the night or died of disease, cold, and starvation.
Disaster, Ethan, is what these countries had prior to socialism. After each country had its revolution, the usage of the land, labor, and capital was reorganized in a way to suit the interests of the vast majority of the people, and not just a small elite. This doesn't mean that these societies shouldn't be criticized. They were far from perfect, and if you're familiar with my channel, you would know that I criticize them a lot, and I urge people not to glorify the more autocratic deficiencies that later emerged in them. But I also urge people to look at the entire picture and try to understand what happened instead of just brushing them off as either good or bad, as if forcing a country into that sort of reductive moral binary and then refusing to explore any further is productive in any way. There is a conversation to be had about how some of these societies went on to take a more authoritarian form. I personally am not a fan of hyper-centralized authority for prolonged periods of time because I think it could lead to some undesirable outcomes, but we need to examine why some of these socialist projects felt the need to centralize authority in such a way to begin with. In every socialist society, the one thing that was a constant, the thing they could all assure would be soon to greet them if their revolutions were successful, was attack and animosity from capitalist nations. This took the form of invasions, bombing, embargoes, sanctions, assassination attempts, and more. This constant bombardment from external threats breeds paranoia and autocracy. It causes power to centralize, dissent to be taken much more seriously, and sometimes viewed as an existential threat. This leads to unideal outcomes. But I have a hard time seeing how this has anything to do with socialism as a theory. It seems to be the result of being under constant...
I bet $100 that Asmin didn't know what a Houthi was. If it wasn't for you, now that's all he tries to talk about. So funny to watch. Asmin Gold tackling geopolitical issues such as the man-made famine implemented by Western-backed coalition forces like the UAE and Saudi Arabia on Yemen is fantastic. I'm sure he has a lot of good opinions on that. I'm sure he has a lot of, he's put a lot of thought, a lot of reading was done.
Attack. If we look at Russia post-revolution, when a multitude of Western nations invaded the country and sided with the White Army to fight against the communists in the Russian Civil War, we can start to understand why paranoia was rampant in the USSR right from the jump. If we shift our focus over to the different kinds of socialist experiments, ones that are often referred to as democratic socialist projects where leaders and parties...
He's saying Noah Samson should be sued. Amazing. Let's get back to this.
Parties rose to power through peaceful and electoral means while maintaining a free and open press as well as encouraging opposing political parties.
Asmongold's knowledge comes naturally to him. Truly impressive. Hasan's the stupid one, spending years to learn about these topics when he could have just played WoW. Also, spent years to learn about these topics, to learn about it in a gay way, in a way that obviously is fucking so dumb when the situation is not complicated. The American government should be using satellites, dude. Famously, the way that they currently operate, they don't use that for some reason. They just,
which is what I advocate for, by the way. We can see how quickly they were infiltrated by the capitalist powers of the world, specifically the US. From Allende in Chile to Arbenz in Guatemala, both men were democratically elected, and it didn't take long for the US to spend millions of dollars infiltrating their media, supporting reactionary elements within their militaries, and ultimately overthrowing them both. We now begin to understand the unfortunate and undesirable decisions made by the likes of Fidel Castro when he decided that a free press, while being under attack by the US, would be a death wish. I don't even advocate for the specifics found in some of these past projects. I champion more of a bottom-up approach. But to paint these past societies as disasters without understanding what they were up against, what they replaced, and without mentioning the millions of lives that were improved because of them, is ahistorical. This leads me to the main point of this video. Why is it when the average apolitical person is confronted with the term socialism, they immediately think of states like the USSR and North Korea, but rarely Salvador Allende's Chile? And the reason for that is simple. The former, states like the USSR, came to power via revolution and were heavily propagandized for decades, partly due to the fact that they survived the initial attack by capitalist forces. The latter, states like Chile, implemented socialism democratically and through electoral means. They weren't hyper-militant, the Americans overthrew them quickly, and there was no need for the US to spend decades filling our heads with Red Scare propaganda about them. Put simply, it's survivorship bias. We remember the countries that survived being attacked by the West, but as a result of them surviving the onslaught, paranoia and autocracy began to rear their ugly heads within those countries. It's a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. So with that out of the way, and to show Ethan the range and variety of past socialist experiments, for the remainder of this video, we will quickly look at some socialist projects that improved the quality of life for the vast majority of people and did not turn into what he could consider a disaster. So let's do that. I put these examples of socialist projects in the honorable mentions category, not because they were unimpressive, but because I've already gone over them many times on this channel, so I want to quickly run through them for those who may be new to my videos. Starting with Salvador Allende of Chile. This topic in particular I've covered many times. If you want an in-depth video about Allende and the Chilean road to socialism, check out this video of mine. But to briefly recap, prior to Allende, much of Chile's industry and resources were owned by foreign corporations, from copper mines to the...
Oh my fucking god, this drama shit is beneath you? Bro, we're literally watching a fucking video that goes through Salvador Allende's Chile or fucking Thomas Sankara and Evo Morales' Bolivia, and you're like, this drama shit. Dog, how do you not understand that drama is the fucking drama is the sweetener on top of this? The video itself has basically nothing to do with fucking Ethan. He's just using Ethan's name as a way to explain to people with clickbait historical socialist attempts that were thwarted by American intervention and Western intervention. That's the entire point of this. It has nothing to do with fucking drama. Virtually every video I watch on stuff like this, whether it be Bad Empanada or Overzealots, is directly doing that.
Telecommunications industry, American businesses soaked up plenty of Chilean wealth while many Chileans lived in poverty. This was...
Bro will be like, American intervention during the Cold War was just drama. Can we not talk about this?
Still is a common arrangement in many areas in the developed...
Salvador Allende, he was a big drama guy, loved the drama.
World. Rich Western corporations will buy up the natural resources, exploit the local labor forces, and if the people of the exploited nation decide to fight back, either through revolution or by electoralism, Western governments, acting in partnership with their business interests, will install a fascist dictator to protect their profits. This little arrangement tends to benefit two groups: the Western business interests, who siphon the wealth away from these poorer countries, and the local elite of these poorer countries, who make up a small percentage of the population and tend to benefit from their alliance with these Western capitalists. In 1970, Salvador Allende was legally and constitutionally elected, and he vowed to take back Chilean resources and industry to help develop the country and pull people out of poverty. He referred to his ambitions as the Chilean road to socialism, where he
Big mistake. Can't do that. Not allowed.
Would bring about those ends by respecting the democratic and constitutional integrity of Chile. This immediately pissed off the Americans, who had spent years trying to convince people that socialism and democracy were mutually exclusive. By the end of Allende's first year, he had nationalized over 150 enterprises and loosened the Americans' grip over his country. He had an impressive first year and a half.
You see, silly socialists, this is why socialism never works, okay? Because it fails on the weight of its own contradictions, except it doesn't. We make sure it fails every single time by doing a bloody coup and then installing the worst fascist dictator you've ever seen and then rewriting the constitution of the country. You know, that's why. And that's the natural balance of things. Obviously, how dare you?
And to back up that statement, I will use.
And then decades later, we will literally openly reveal that we've done such things. But what are you supposed to do? You've already been so heavily propagandized against this position that you can't even fucking recognize that America was responsible for this.
This is my favorite Marxist source, the CIA. Allende's economy saw an 8.5% jump in GDP, a lower rate of inflation compared to his predecessor, the lowest unemployment rate in a decade, a sharp boost in real wages for Chile's lower classes, leading to a consumer buying spree that boosted manufacturing output by 12%, and an additional 12% boost in construction activity, leading to a decline of the unemployment rate in the Santiago area from 8.3% to 3.8%. Now, to you and I, this seems like a good thing. People are enjoying rising living standards, and foreign exploitation is screeching to a halt. But
no, I don't, because that is happening that is happening against corporate profits, and I don't like that. And also, I am a industrious Chilean entrepreneur, and for me, I'm gonna go back and ask some Western allies, like, yo, these guys are fucking doing some crazy shit. You know, you want to come in and help us out a little bit?
But for the Americans and the Chilean conservative elite, this was really bad news. The CIA began funding right-wing opposition in Chile. They gave over $1 million to El Mercurio, an anti-Allende conservative media outlet. Nixon gave the order to make the economy scream when referring to what he wanted done to Allende's Chile. The Chilean right-wing and business owners engaged in attempts to sabotage the economy by withholding their goods and refusing to sell them, which led to artificial scarcity. The US established an economic blockade. It used its...
This is where this is where the heavy hand comes in, okay? That's it. Like, if you want to have markets, that's fine. Okay? Great. Sure. You can have your markets. There is going to be heavy regulatory control over it, okay? The moment that you hit the artificial scarcity button, the moment where you limit supply when demand is still rising, I'm coming in and I'm saying, okay, well, it's really sad, but we're going to have to basically take over your company, at least for the interim period. Now, what's interesting about this is that I've actually advocated for the Biden administration to do this and prior liberal administrations to do this in the past as well. Like, this isn't like dictatorial control or whatever. I mean, I guess Americans would consider that, but Americans would say that is the case. But like, this was an issue with Chavez as well. This was a major issue with Chavez. People think like Chavez was this like ruthless autocrat, but it ironically was a major problem for him too. In the same exact sectors, actually. It was the agricultural output in the grocery stores that refused to collaborate with the Chavez regime at the time. And the very same issue started in Venezuela as it did in Chile as well. And the issue, Chavez, sorry, not Chavez. English is my second language. I only speak Turkish. I don't speak any Spanish or Spanish adjacent, Portuguese. I don't speak any other language. Okay, give me a break. I'm saying it wrong. But anyway, point is, I've advocated for this in America as well, okay? Remember during the OPEC plus induced oil crisis that was taking place, I said time and time again that we heavily subsidize the fossil fuel industry and we must demand a significant level of control over the fossil fuel industry in the United States of America. Extraction should be nationalized across the board. But even if it's not going to be nationalized across the board, if our own oil and gas providers if our own oil and gas industry does not actually try to outcompete OPEC plus by steadily increasing supply to the best of their ability for the time being, in an effort to adjust prices for the American markets, then yeah, you should take them over. You should either cut the fucking money faucet off or just take it over. I think that's perfectly valid. And there's already legal precedent for this. We have a Defense Production Act that Donald Trump utilized. You know, there are already existing legal precedent to be able to do such things in times of crisis. So this is not far-fetched even in the United States of America. And it certainly is not far-fetched in a place like Chile where the moment that a sector guided by sector leaders who don't align with you ideologically refuse to play ball and try to starve out the fucking population or induce hyperinflation is a moment where you have to come in and be like, no, you have to do this. It's fucking ridiculous.
Influence to cut international and bilateral aid and private credit to Chile prevented Allende from being able to renegotiate the national debt that he had inherited from his predecessor, and so much more. Long story short, the right-wing Chilean military, taking advantage of the US's work in destabilizing Allende, bombed the presidential palace and overthrew the government. Allende lost his life that day, and Chile fell to the dictatorial rule of Augusto Pinochet, who spent the coming decades torturing, murdering, kidnapping, and terrorizing Chileans while protecting American business interests in the country. So I guess in a roundabout way, this did lead to disaster, but not because of socialism, but because of the overthrow of socialism and the replacement of Allende with a tyrant who would protect U.S. business interests. In addition to Allende's Chile, Thomas Sankara's legacy in Burkina Faso is worth looking at as well. And yes, I apologize, this image is computer generated, very cringe of me, but there are just 0 public domain images of my guy Thomas, so I guess this is what we're gonna have to do. Burkina Faso was originally a French colony called Upper Volta. Like many other colonized lands, it suffered the usual burdens of colonialism and exploitation. It was severely destitute, prone to famines, the labor force was exploited by France, gender discrimination was rampant, and the overall quality of life was horrendous. We should all know by now that colonialism is a form of violence that breeds resistance, and in the case of Upper Volta, the Marxist revolutionary Thomas Sankara is who it bred. He came to power in 1983 and immediately got to work. He fought against gender discrimination.
I saw a fucking right-wing conspiracy Twitter account unironically post Sankara, not knowing that he was a very famous revolutionary Marxist, because he was talking about how like you have to control your own food production. Like we shouldn't be expecting handouts. And the guy literally thought he was a fucking conservative. And he was posting about him like, hell yeah, dude, based. It's awesome.
Discrimination by ending forced marriages and female genital mutilation. He launched healthcare, literacy, and vaccination campaigns, land reform and nationalization programs. He focused on infrastructure, combated desertification by planting millions of trees.
Here it is. Warpath, get up. There's work to do. This lady says, can you tell me, this Western Journal says, can you tell me why you said no to receiving food aid? They have not helped us to develop. They have instead created a beggar mentality. We hold out our hands to receive food. That is not a good thing. Our farmers have stopped producing because they cannot sell what they produce. This is what USA does, by the way. I mean, like it, hate it, it doesn't matter. This kind of USA does play a destabilizing role like this, very famously. But that's besides the point. My based god, Donald Trump, JD Pondon, is putting an end to that, except the deep state Supreme Court brought it back because Amy Covid Barrett, who's a fake charlatan, who's also in the pocket of the CIA, wanted to restore USAID funding. Anyway, let's continue.
produisent n'arrivent plus à vendre.
Our farmers
les
stop producing. The surplus from farmers in other countries is brought in here. We want something else.
Celui qui veut nous aider vraiment,
Those who
peut nous
really
donner
want to help
des
us can give us
charrues,
plows,
ou des
tractors,
tracteurs, des
fertilizer,
engrais, des insecticides,
insecticide, watering cans,
des
drills,
tuyaux,
dams. That's
des
how we
arrosoirs,
would
des
define
barrages, des
food aid.
forages. Voilà, ça c'est de l'aide alimentaire. Mais celui qui nous amène les sacs
Those
de
who come
blé,
with wheat,
de mil,
millet,
de maïs,
corn,
ou
or
du
milk,
lait,
they are not
cela
helping
ne nous aide
us.
pas.
Yeah, this account posted him. Is one of those like based right-wing accounts, and he posted he posted this, not realizing Thomas Sankara's background. Anyway, let's keep going.
Dramatically lowered the infant mortality rate, and he fought effectively against hunger. So effectively that Jean Ziegler of the UN declared, Thomas Sankara has conquered hunger. Burkina Faso in 4 years has become food self-sufficient. This is notable considering Burkina Faso's history with famines and food scarcity. Sankara also refused to play ball.
Trump just gutted RFA, RFE, and Voice of America. Unlike USA, this cannot be prevented by the neocons. No, he did that because Democrats in Congress gave him the power to do so. Like, that's what he also fucking gutted like a bunch of mental health programs. You know what I mean? Like, he's a fucking asshole. It is funny, though, that he has smoke for Voice of America for some reason. Someone probably told him it was woke. I don't know. Maybe it was Jackson Hinkle. Jackson Hinkledink was in his ear being like, Mr. President, Voice of America's woke. Just kidding. He would never do that because I still think he's a federal agent. Anyway, let's continue.
With the IMF and institute.
Remember, chat, this administration is fucking blackbagging people who are objectively not doing any of the things that many of my naysayers say I do all the time in terms of like offering material support to Hamas or whatever, and they're blackbagging them regardless. But Jackson Hinkle can go to the fucking Hassan Nasrallah funeral and then come back to the United States of America without even a scratch, okay?
That has a history of predatory lending practices known to worsen conditions of already poor countries and open up their economies for Western exploitation. All of this is not to say that Sankara never made mistakes or that he was some kind of god amongst men. He himself would hate that description, as he openly criticized personality cults and he didn't allow for statues to be built in his image, but he absolutely sacrificed all he could for the people of his country. He even refused to take a presidential salary because his priority was helping the citizenry above all else. This completely contradicts the stereotypical socialist fat cat who lives in luxury while his people starve, the kind of Western caricature that we've been programmed to believe. Sankara, like Allende, shouldn't really be touched on as a footnote and deserves his own full video, but for the sake of brevity, he too was eventually overthrown in a coup, and Burkina Faso immediately began to regress in his absence. Bolivia, like other Latin American countries, still feels the burdens of colonialism, even to this day. The way the land and resources are divided up in many of these countries largely continues colonial landholding practices where a small group of white elites, descendants of European colonizers, hold the majority of the land while indigenous populations live in poverty. In addition to land and resources being controlled by a small ruling elite, they are also bought up and hoarded by foreign corporations, further exacerbating inequality. These conditions gave rise to many leftist Latin American movements that aimed to reclaim their land and resources from foreign influence, kick out the Western imperialists, and use their country's natural wealth to serve the vast majority of their populations, not just a small ruling class. In addition to all this, in the 80s and 90s, Bolivia was subjected to neoliberal policies as a result of them taking on World Bank and IMF loans. I've touched on this phenomenon earlier in this video, but the IMF, World Bank, and other international financial institutions push developing countries to take out predatory loans. The goal is to entrap these countries in debt. Once they're in debt, the IMF or the World Bank forces them to abide by specific loan conditionalities and adopt policies that serve to enrich Western capitalist interests at the expense of the poor, indebted nation. I have a whole video on this topic if you want to learn more. In the case of Bolivia, they were subjected to intense privatizations where Western interests bought up their shit and benefited from the wealth generated by it. The World Bank even forced Bolivia to privatize the goddamn water supply and sell it off to a consortium led by Bechtel, a U.S. corporation. This led to an increase in the price of water that many families couldn't afford, and since the private sector tends to follow profit and not human well-being, Poorer areas were subjected to poor quality services. To quote Frederick Gordon's Freshwater Resources and Interstate Cooperation, the privatization of Bolivia's water supply eliminated any guarantee of water distribution to rural areas. This resulted in only half of Cochabamba's population being connected to the central water system. The law also prohibited the peasants from constructing collection tanks to gather rainwater. Law 2029 required people to ask the water superintendent for permission to collect rainwater. These goddamn capitalists think they own the fucking clouds. In addition to water, oil and other natural resources were also privatized and therefore could not be efficiently used to serve the Bolivian population. Something needed to change. This led to the rise of a man named Evo Morales and his movement towards socialism, or MAS, party. Morales assumed the presidency in 2006, and he was the first indigenous president of the country. This was a big deal considering Bolivia's history with racism. His ascension to the presidency reflected the end of a particular Andean form of apartheid that had marginalized the majority indigenous population since the Spanish conquest, as author Benjamin Cole put it. Morales quickly got to work writing a new Bolivian constitution that served everyone, not just the ruling class. In compliance with socialist principles of participatory democracy, he called on the indigenous population to help draft the constitution. As Arnold August said, people writing their own constitution and ratifying it in a popular referendum is one of the hallmarks of a democracy. Prior to Morales' presidency, foreign corporations had significant control over Bolivia's oil and gas, extracting hefty profits while the country didn't get to benefit from its own natural wealth. Morales changed this. He brought the hydrocarbon sector under state control and renegotiated contracts with the foreign companies, forcing them into positions where they had to strike a deal that would serve the Bolivian people or get kicked out of the country completely. This allowed for Morales to use Bolivian oil revenues to fund social programs, development, and improve the lives of the many, all while remaining firm in his critique of neoliberalism and his desire to shift towards socialism. He redistributed about 130 million acres of land from state or private ownership to indigenous families, many of whom had historically been forced into sharecropping or slavery. He grew the country's GDP by about 4.8% a year, halved the amount of people living in extreme poverty, leading to the World Bank changing Bolivia's classification from low income to lower middle income. He funded schools, hospitals, and infrastructure programs with the funds generated by the hydrocarbon sector that was now actually serving the people and not just the rich, raised the minimum wage, and much, much more. By 2012, Morales helped 1 million Bolivians escape poverty. Unfortunately, like the many other instances of democratically elected socialist governments, Morales' story doesn't have a happy ending. US intervention paired with a growing right-wing movement in Bolivia made for hard times to come. As Morales was running again for his 4th term, which in my opinion he shouldn't have done, it would have made more sense to pass the reins off to a younger MAS member, the election results stopped updating. Once they resumed updating, Morales' lead had grown as rural votes were counted. This caused his opposition to accuse him of fraud, and the Organization of American States claimed that the election showed signs of irregularities. However, later independent studies, including by the Center for Economic and Policy Research, found no statistical evidence of fraud, and multiple experts accused the OAS of using flawed methodology and dishonesty. The OAS
This is literally the reason OAS interference, unironically, is the reason why the last time Maduro pulled off some interesting inconsistencies in his election, even though the Carter Carter Foundation found no irregularities, as far as I understand, in their reporting, and they're pretty consistent. Like, they have been consistent at tracking Venezuelan elections. The other countries, the other Latin American countries, actually were very critical of the last round of the Venezuelan elections. And then the OAS came in, and the American government came in, and they started chirping at Maduro. And every single Latin American country, from fucking Lula all the way to AMLO, were like, never mind. No, you're good. You're good, big dog. Maduro, keep doing your thing. Straight up. Not realizing that, like, these other Latin American countries, socialist or not socialist, are autonomous. Like, they fucking understand. They understand when something is fucked up. Like when Maduro says he's going to go and invade Guyana because he just wants more. He realizes there might be oil in Guyana. He's like, oh, there's historically a reason for Venezuela to have ownership over Guyana. Like, when stuff like that happens, other Latin American countries are like, no, you can't do that. The fuck are you talking about? But every single time the American government decides to interfere in those affairs, every other Latin American country goes, never mind. Fuck it. YOLO mode. Okay? That is because they understandably recognize the OAS or America as a far greater evil than what any other fucking like autocrat could do in their own backyard. One must ask why they have this America bad mentality. Anyway, why doesn't Trump like Maduro? That's actually a really good question. I don't know. He likes every other authoritarian strongman, including those who are like homies with Maduro. So it's weird to me that he doesn't like Maduro. He has had the most amount of smoke for Venezuela from the start. Like, he has never not had it. Maybe he considers him to be weak, which in some respects he is. He really does hate, he hates Venezuela. He hates Venezuelans, and he fucking hates Maduro. Which is interesting because maybe the Floridians, I don't know, but like a lot of the fucking Venezuelans that came to Florida came under Trump because of Trump's sanctions. So I don't know.
Then went on to request that Morales redo the election, and he agreed, saying it was no problem. But before the election took place, the conservative military forced him to step down and flee the country.
Not exactly what happened. The area in the coast of Guyana was already disputed. When oil was found, Maduro just pressed more, even because Guyana made a highly prejudicial deal with Exxon for its exploitation. Yeah, you can't. Come on, dude. Come on. No, that's fucking bullshit. Look, I like Chavez. People will get mad at me for even saying that. Maduro cannot even hold a fucking candle, and has consistently used the popular momentum of Chavez to basically hold everything together. He has also been consistently under attack and undermined by Western powers, certainly in the same way that Chavez was as well. But he's not. You know, I'm not the biggest Maduro head. Maybe Trump doesn't like him because he thinks he's weak. I don't know. Maybe he sees him as like a Assad style person. Someone in the chat said like the Assad of Latin America. And he's just like, I hate him. He's not good.
Make no mistake, this was a military coup.
Maduro's not the problem. USA sanctions is? Yes, no shit. That is always the case. I mean, here, an objectively more authoritarian regime would be the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. What's the greater evil there? The actual administration, the administrative state, which is fairly authoritarian, or the fucking sanctions? It's always the sanctions. Yes, America is always technically responsible for more harm than no matter how brutal the fucking admin is. Sanctions are collective punishment with the hopes of like creating some sort of coup or some sort of revolution. I think it's because he's Latino. No, Trump likes Lula. I mean, not Lula, fucking... No, I was going to say Bolsonaro, but like obviously Bolsonaro's a fascist.
He was replaced by Janine Áñez,
and he likes Claudia. Trump likes Claudia. Claudia Scheinbaum, beautiful, powerful woman. Beautiful, powerful women's. She's controlling Mexico with an iron fist. I love her. She's so good.
Power unconstitutionally. Áñez was a deranged right-winger who went on to massacre Morales supporters in the aftermath of his overthrow, leading Bolivia to charge her with genocide. So again, I guess there was a bit of a disaster that took place here, but it wasn't socialism. It was getting rid of...
Fairly authoritarian is a bit of an understatement when talking about North Korea law. There's literally no country that is more authoritarian on this planet. Probably. Israel's pretty bad. Saudi Arabia. A lot of the Gulf states are pretty bad. I would say Saudi Arabia is probably worse than. I mean, it's not a competition. It's just there are a lot of awful dictatorial regimes. Lately, Bolsonaro was saying we are importing nukes from China and begging Trump to coup us, nationalists, by the way.
Socialism. Aside from the projects mentioned so far in this video, it is worth highlighting a few other socialist projects whose achievements seem to get swept under the rug. From the success of Slovenia, which came from very humble beginnings only to become a wealthy nation while maintaining its unique market.
What is the answer besides sanctions then? We sanctioned Russia for what? The invasion? A way of saying you're being punished without going to war? Great question. It's an understandable mechanism against a fully established nation state that is a foreign adversary. What are the crimes of Venezuela for the sanctions when they initially started? What are the crimes for example, like what crime did the Cuban government commit? Oh, that's right. They had a successful revolution against their fucking fascist leadership that was aligned with the United States of America. We offered them arms, we offered them training, it didn't work, and then we punished the Cuban leadership and the Cuban population afterwards. Like, I think sanctions across the board only fucking work against foreign allies. They don't work against foreign adversaries in general, especially because of, Jeff Stein did really good work on this at the Washington Post. And I've covered that extensively on here, but the American sanctions regime is so easy to conduct because it's done through the Treasury, and you don't need a lot of research or a lot of evidence to basically go and sanction a country or a sector in a country or even like one industry leader. And that is precisely why we've been hitting that sanction button so fucking hard that we've basically created a secondary market of global trade now. Like a seriously robust network of trade around the globe because we fucking sanctioned everyone. It's an interesting phenomena, and it's partially the reason why, like, for example, with Russia, it didn't really work. I mean, it made things more costly, certainly, but it wasn't enough of an economic shock, especially for a foreign adversary, that they were still clearly able to overcome those problems and continue pummeling Ukraine. Sanctions on a country like Israel, on the other hand, would be unimaginably effective, like incredibly effective. Sanctions historically have worked in, even the mere threat of sanctions have worked historically in apartheid South Africa because apartheid South Africa was in the Western sphere of influence. I would say that it's the same. It's the same for a country like Israel, rather than our adversaries.
Socialist model to the Indian state of Kerala, which of course is still forced to work within the confines of the Indian constitution, but nonetheless has done their best to build a democratic socialist project that ushered the state into an era of high human development, a thriving worker cooperative sector, near universal literacy, an increased lifespan, one of the lowest mortality rates in India, and an overall improvement in the quality of life. We begin to see that it's unfair to brush off socialism as an ideology that only ever leads to misery. It erases the stories of the millions of people whose lives were improved because of it. Alright, well, it would be nice for Mr.
It's a good video.
H3 to stumble across this video, and if he has any questions, I'm always down to chat. But that's all I got for now. Thanks.